Welcome into the Ryland Conowalchuk Show, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Today's topic, today's topics actually are around the Carney going down to the FIFA thing and gonna have a brief meeting with not really a meeting, but a side talk, trying to get a side talk with Trump. He's obviously gonna have a side talk with Scheinbaum, the president of Mexico, and obviously the current negotiations around the Russia-Ukraine situation of Trump's team over in Russia and over in Ukraine once in a while to try and end the war in Ukraine, and John Rustad resigning as leader of the BC Conservative Party. So much more. Thank you for tuning in. Um, Obviously Carney's heading down there after Trump had made such comments as he's not interested in negotiating might end the whole Kuzma agreement. I do think that's bluff, but let's walk through a couple of scenarios here. So let's say that was the case, and it was something he was interested in doing, and he was interested in um, ending the agreement, of course, which would not benefit the United States. It would not benefit Canada, and it would certainly would not benefit Mexico, even though Mexico is quite close with China. First of all, for Canada, that would obviously be a recessionary period of time. In my personal view, there would be a recession and probably would happen, that you'd have a recession happen, and then obviously Mark Carney, if he didn't get a deal, would be very unpopular because that's what he ran on in the campaign. Obviously going to be tough for Mark Carney to run for re-election because he probably won't win if he doesn't get an agreement. But here's another situation you could look at. If Mark Carney runs for re-election and the thing was he got a bad deal and he brought it back saying, I signed the best deal I could ever sign with President Donald Trump. Obviously, wasn't the best deal with Donald Trump, didn't get the best deal. Now you have a situation where you're dealing with unpopularity again. So what Carney has to watch an interesting line, but for Carney's interest, he might want to try and stride this thing as long as he can and wait for the Democrats to win the House or the Senate, because that is needed to pass the agreement, of course, on trade. So that's obviously something Carney could try and stride this out a little bit. Obviously, if Trump wants to renegotiate, he's going to want to be quick with this because he's going to want to be able to pass it through the House and the Senate, of course. And that's going to obviously be a challenge for Carney. He'll probably want to straddle this thing out as much as he can to create opposition to try and get the best deal for Canada and Mexico. Trump even said a couple days ago in that press conference, he said basically that he would be interested in maybe just having separate deals with both countries. And Canada's personal view, and this has been Canada's position since the start of the NAFTA agreement, and then the whole free trade between the U.S. and Canada, has been that we need to be partners with the have Mexico a part of the agreement to balance out the power axis situation, how much power the U.S. gets in those negotiations, which has been something that Canada has always tried to have Mexico in the agreement, so the U.S. wouldn't have too much power to ram and take advantage of Canada. Because what could happen is a good example. So our current auto sector, it would be much easier for the U.S. to take advantage of the auto sector if we did not have such an agreement we have today with Mexico. We get rid of those agreements and we go separate different ways. Canada would probably get hammered in the agreement and would get hammered, and then we would be in a whole other situation where obviously Carney's going to have to explain how he did not get a deal with Mexico, a part of the agreement, which probably would bring in a conservative government, which I would be a whole fan of. I would rather I would personally rather the conservatives deal with this issue because I'm not sure Carney is effectively doing this very well. But another thing too is this is obviously a challenge for Mark Carney, and his government still got a 52% approval rating according to most polls. So if he's still got a large approval rating, Canadians are going to be as patient as they can until he can actually get a deal with Donald Trump, of course. But eventually that patience will eventually wear out, and there'll be more continuing criticism of obviously Trump. And obviously Trump is always going to be critical, but Carney's obviously going to get more scrutiny if he can't get the deal. The question would be the dairy sector with supply management. What happens there? Obviously, Donald Trump has been an irritant. Have we lived up to the quota of allowing more American dairy into the Canadian market? That's a great question. I have no answer to. I might have to look into that, but of course, that's going to be something that's obviously a challenge for the Canadian delegation, because if they didn't live up to that promise that Trump signed with the Kuzma Agreement, or USMCA, well, as the Americans call it, then we have obviously another problem on our hand. That's probably the thing he's going to be most mad about. Let's move on to our next topic. Putin's obviously Putin, Zelensky, and Trump negotiating, trying to get peace. Obviously, the challenge with this so far is, how did this war obviously start? Is maybe where we should start with this, so we can kind of get a background into this. So obviously, it started in February 2022, the 24th, I think, if I can remember very correctly. The part of that was because of weak turns from the United States. They did not under Biden. They did not deter Vladimir Putin very well. And then you got Obama back in 2014 when he invaded Crimea, didn't deter. And then obviously when George W. Bush was in power, and a terrible administration he had under his Republican leadership, failed to keep Putin from invading Georgia, and a whole other disasters he had under his administration. Repeated presidents showing weakness gave Putin a chance after Biden. And here's a key one here. As Biden obviously went to go meet with Putin in December, I believe. Was it December? Yeah, December or November of 2021. It was somewhere around in there. Biden went to meet with Trump, and he looked obviously he was showing signs of aging and not being there already, which was clearly not a very good thing. So, obviously, Putin sees that. He's going to take advantage of that. And the thing for Biden is he wasn't exactly putting much pressure on Vladimir Putin not to invade. Obviously, Kamala Harris had that big NATO address or whatever back in 2022 saying Ukraine can be a part of NATO. That's obviously a piece that Putin would not really want, of course. That's not going to be something he's going to be interested in. But we'll have to see what happens here as time goes on. But certainly there's been movement on these peace negotiations so far. The question would be whether Putin is very interested in these negotiations and ending the war in Ukraine. That's going to be the fundamental point that is going to happen. And I'm not quite convinced he's actually interested in ending the war right now. I'm not even sure Zelensky is right now, because the thing for them, first for Putin, is if he ends the war, the challenge for him is the oligarchs and the Russian military, Russian military officials. He said he degraded the Russian military reputation because he invaded, saying he was going to take it over in 3 weeks or 4 weeks, whatever it was. He said he was going to take it over. He was going to win the war. He was going to take all of Ukraine in 3 weeks. Then you have a problem where he doesn't do that, and he's been fighting 3 years, just about 4 years now of this war, where he's gotten only 10% of Ukrainian land, has made no farther progress into Ukraine, and obviously that is going to be the challenge where Putin's obviously going to be criticized. And that's the part where they're going to be critical, and he's going to be worried about being overthrown by the oligarchs and the Russian military because of his destroyment of the Russian military reputation. So we'll see what happens here, but thank you for tuning in. Actually, sorry, I forgot one topic. John Rustad obviously resigns as a leader of the BC Conservatives. I think it was about time he resigned. There was obviously fracturing within his caucus. There's obviously challenges that he was facing, of course, to keep on to his leadership. He won the leadership review, a month ago? And now he's obviously, the caucus, 20 caucus members were finally having enough of his leadership. They are fracturing on second or third issues that weren't really important. The thing about leading a conservative party is especially in Canada, is you got to focus on the economy. You got to focus on crime. Some of those more major issues that play, where you have the alignment. But what happened is they started going. Then his caucus was, and he was starting to go to second, third party issues, and it just fell apart from there. Where they had major fractures, and you mostly try and stay out of those issues as a party because you're going to have obviously within a conservative movement, you're going to have very much disagreement. That's obviously a problem for him. Well, I'm glad he resigned. Well, hopefully they get a leader of that party that is very much more better at leading the party than what they had before. Thank you for tuning in.